The day I became the most despised man in Lakeside Estates was also the day I gained more influence than anyone else there. $500. That's the price Karen Wellington and her homeowners association slapped on me for taking my grieving daughter fishing. What they didn't realize was that I had 4 million reasons to fight back, and more than enough bitterness to use every single one. If you're sitting on the toilet scrolling through this video just to avoid another one of those soul-crushing HOA meetings, drop a comment and tell me your secret hideout. Trust me, this story is going to hold your attention. My name's Remy Thornfra, and this is how it all unfolded. Just 2 months back, my life looked like a picture-perfect American dream. I'd spent a decade and a half in venture capital and finance, eventually selling my shares in several promising tech startups for enough money to walk away at 42. Early retirement, financial freedom, everything people work their whole lives to reach. But money has a way of proving it can't buy you what truly matters. My wife, Rachel, lost her fight with cancer last year, leaving me to raise our 14-year-old daughter, Solon, on my own. Grief nearly crushed both of us. The only thing that seemed to ease the pain was fishing, the last activity we all shared together before Rachel's health spiraled for the final time. So when I decided it was time for a new chapter, I searched for a house near water. Somewhere peaceful, somewhere that might help us heal. On paper, Lakeside Estates checked every box. Upscale homes, well-rated schools, and a beautiful 6-acre lake in the heart of the community. The realtor mentioned an HOA existed, but assured me it was just the typical stuff. Yard upkeep, exterior colors, the usual. I should have caught the warning signs when she hesitated before saying, "The president, Karen Wellington, is very dedicated to keeping property values high." At the time, I brushed it off. I'd spent years dealing with stubborn personalities in business. How much trouble could one neighborhood official cause? I found out soon enough, one quiet Saturday morning in April. Sola and I had been at the dock for about an hour, fishing on the calm water. It was the first time I'd seen her smile for real in weeks. She just caught her second bluegill and was carefully slipping the hook out when a sharp, cutting voice interrupted the morning air. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing?" I turned to see a woman in her late 50s striding toward us. Perfectly styled blonde highlights, expensive-looking athleisure, and the unmistakable, "I need to talk to the manager," haircut. She held a tablet like it was a weapon and wore an expression that suggested she'd caught us committing a crime. "Good morning," I said, forcing a polite tone. "Just fishing with my daughter. I offer a hand. I'm Remy Thornfra. We moved into the Sycamore Drive house about 2 months ago." She ignored my hand entirely, her fingers tapping rapidly on the tablet. "Mr. Thornfra, fishing is strictly prohibited in our community lake. That's a violation of HOA rules. I'm Karen Wellington, HOA president." She said her title as if she were announcing royalty. "The fine is $500. Karen's hypocrisy became impossible to ignore once I started digging. Just weeks earlier, she'd hosted parties at that same lake where she fined me, complete with wine, loud music, and laughter echoing across the water. Apparently, community atmosphere was only an issue when it suited her. The deeper I went into the HOA documents, the more I uncovered. Hidden in the fine print was a clause that changed everything. The lake was technically listed as shared property, a common amenity for all residents. Nowhere did it grant the HOA exclusive control over its use. That evening, I looked out my window and saw Karen herself at the lakeside gazebo with friends, sipping wine and laughing. I muttered to myself, "So, this is a game of rules, is it? Fine. First step, figure out who really owns this water." The very next morning, I ran into an older gentleman walking his dog past my house. He introduced himself as Merrick Henderson, a retired attorney who lived 3 doors down. The moment I mentioned Karen Wellington, his pleasant smile shifted into a scowl. "Ah, you've met the neighborhood tyrant," he said. "Let me guess, she cited you and slapped a fine on you?" When I nodded, Merrick shook his head knowingly. "She's been treating this place like her personal kingdom for years. Most folks just pay and stay quiet." He lowered his voice and glanced around. "But if you want the real story, come by for coffee. I got files, plenty of HOA horror stories." I took him up on the offer that same afternoon. Merrick's home was lined with shelves of law books and walls of framed photos, no doubt from his career. Over strong coffee, he pulled out a folder thick with documents. "Here's the part most residents don't know," he explained. "The HOA doesn't actually own the lake. Meridian Development, the original builder of this community, still owns it. They only leased recreation rights to the HOA for 30 years. That's why Karen can enforce rules." But he tapped a highlighted date on one contract. "That lease expires in less than 2 months. I sat up straighter. "So, what happens then?" "Meridian could renew the lease, sell the lake to the HOA, or sell it to someone else entirely. And most people here haven't got a clue. They assume the HOA owns everything." Merrick leaned closer. "But here's where it gets interesting. Meridian's in financial trouble. I've heard they're desperate to liquidate assets. Karen knows it too." Together, we dug through public records, and the picture became even uglier. Karen's behavior wasn't just about small fines. Through shell companies linked to her real estate firm, she'd been snapping up neighborhood houses whenever residents were pressured to sell, usually after being buried under violation notices. "She's setting up for a bigger play," Merrick warned. "I've got good reason to believe she's negotiating directly with Meridian. Not for the HOA, for her own company. She wants that lake. If she gets it, she'll cut resident access and use the land for luxury development." Suddenly, the fishing ban made perfect sense. It had nothing to do with wildlife protection. It was all part of her setup. Merrick soon introduced me to another ally, Samuel Washington, a retired banker in his 60s and one of the only residents brave enough to stand against Karen openly. Samuel, a distinguished man with a commanding presence, had his own history with her prejudice. He welcomed us into his study, where he revealed a database he'd quietly maintained for years. "At first, I was just keeping records," Samuel explained, showing us rows of spreadsheets. But patterns started to emerge. The data was undeniable. Residents of color received nearly 3 times the number of citations as their white neighbors. New families were punished for infractions longtime residents routinely got away with. And in case after case, undervalued homes eventually ended up in the hands of shell corporations tied back to Karen's firm. "She never buys directly," Samuel said, scrolling through property records. "Instead, she hides behind LLCs, Lakeside Investments, Wellington Holdings, Sierra Vista Properties. Different names, same puppet master." He pointed to 6 separate properties purchased this way in just the last 5 years. The pattern was identical. Excessive violations, property values dropping, desperate sales, and quick resales at a profit after cosmetic upgrades. Merrick's face was grim. "And now, the lake is her grand prize. Meridian's been strapped since the recession. They overextended on commercial properties, and lately, they've been quietly selling off residential assets. That lake is one of the last unencumbered properties they've got." Samuel added, "Originally, the land was slated for condos 30 years ago, but environmental laws blocked the build. Those laws have loosened since then. With Karen's contacts in City Hall, permits won't be a problem. Half a dozen luxury homes along the shore could net her 7 or 8 million. That was when my professional instincts kicked in. I leaned forward. "Tell me more about Meridian's financial position." Over the next few days, Samuel introduced me to some of his banking contacts. Quietly, they confirmed what Merrick had suspected. Meridian was drowning in debt after a failed commercial project during the pandemic. With credit maxed out, they were desperate, offloading land just to stay afloat. The lake, valued at around $300,000, was one of their only clean assets. Meanwhile, Merrick had begun arranging quiet gatherings with other frustrated residents. We met in rotation, at Samuel's house, in private library rooms, even once in the back of a friendly neighbor's bakery. The stories people shared were chillingly familiar. She cited me for having too many Christmas decorations. One retired teacher, James Morris, recalled bitterly. "That was the very day after I spoke out against her at a town council meeting. I've had those same Christmas lights up for 15 years, and suddenly they cite me for some vague brightness code." James Morris fumed. Maria Gonzalez, a healthcare worker, added another example. My 3 foster kids were kicked out of the community pool for being too loud, right when Karen's grandchildren wanted in. When I asked which rule they'd broken, she told me it was her executive decision as HOA president. Diana Winters, a young widow who'd moved in shortly before me, described how Karen personally led an inspection through her backyard under the pretense of checking for mosquito breeding. 2 days later, Diana received 5 separate violation notices, all for things every neighbor had, but no one else was cited for. When Diana complained, Karen suggested, matter-of-factly, that perhaps the neighborhood wasn't the right fit for someone in her situation. Piece by piece, the pattern emerged. Find anyone who might resist, isolate them, then apply selective pressure through the HOA, violate, fine, and force compliance, or push them to sell. Those who stayed kept their heads down. Those who fought back suffered escalating harassment. From our meetings, we began to identify allies across the community. Samuel set up a secure messaging group so residents could swap stories and documents without fear of retaliation. An underground resistance was taking shape, quiet, cautious, and growing. I also dug into Karen's personal finances. As an investor, I know how to read property and business filings, and what I found surprised me. Wellington Properties looked impressive at first glance, but it was heavily leveraged. Karen had taken multiple lines of credit against her holdings, apparently to fund her lifestyle and bankroll further property acquisitions. If her lake scheme failed, she'd be in real trouble. She's not just greedy, I told Merrick and Samuel one night. This is about survival. The record showed she was dangerously overextended. The lake development wasn't merely opportunity, it was a lifeline that made her both more ruthless and more brittle. Samuel put me in touch with Robert Shun, a local broker who had inside knowledge of the lake sale. We met at a coffee shop a few blocks away to keep things discreet. Robert confirmed Meridian was desperate. They'd given Wellington Properties a 60-day exclusive window, but a clause allowed Meridian to accept a better, fast cash offer. Meridian was bleeding and needed money immediately. Karen was trying to cobble together financing, but if someone could offer instant payment, Meridian might bite. Robert also warned that Karen's empire was mostly smoke and mirrors. Impressive on paper, but fragile. She needed a big win to stave off creditors, which explained her ferocity. That's when my venture instincts took over. This lake was a classic distressed asset opportunity, and I had the capital to act fast with a cash offer that would be irresistible. The question was timing. Let her publicly commit to the project, Samuel advised. Let her push assessments and spend her political capital. Then we strike. Merrick agreed. The more Karen invested publicly, the more spectacular her fall would be if we succeeded. We kept our true intentions strictly secret, appearing to be only a group documenting HOA overreach while quietly building our case. Karen knew we were meeting. Enforcement actions against our associate spiked, but she had no idea what we were plotting. When Robert arranged a confidential meeting with Tom Branson, the Meridian exec handling the lake sale, I knew we'd reached a turning point. The meeting was held in a private conference room at a downtown law firm, far from prying neighborhood eyes. Tom was blunt. We gave Wellington a 60-day exclusive, but there's a clause letting us consider other offers if they guarantee rapid closing. Karen's still lining up investors, but we needed cash yesterday. What's her offer? I asked. $300,000, paid over 18 months with complicated financing. Tom said, frustrated. I leaned in. I'll give you $350,000, cash, and I can close in 7 days. Tom's eyebrows lifted. That would get the board's attention, he admitted. But fair warning, Karen has friends in local government. She won't roll over. I'm counting on it, I said. 2 days later, I had a preliminary agreement contingent only on a routine environmental review that could be completed within the week. To keep the purchase opaque, I'd registered the buyer as Thornikoff Holdings LLC, a shell I created so Karen wouldn't immediately link the bid to me unless she dug into corporate filings. With our coalition in place and the acquisition vehicle set, we were ready to move to the next phase. As I started exploring my options, Karen must have caught wind of what I was doing. Out of nowhere, violation notices began landing on my doorstep for things no one had ever mentioned before. We'd supposedly unmanaged, unapproved landscaping rocks, a mailbox deemed the wrong height, and even a fine for my garage door color, despite it being the exact shade approved when I moved in. The fine stacked up fast. $100 here, $200 there. Within just 2 weeks, I was staring at nearly $2,000 in penalties. Whenever I tried to dispute them, my appeals mysteriously vanished or were dismissed without reason. It was obvious Karen was using every weapon she had to try to bend me into submission. Then came the incident that shook me the most. Son had left her bike in our driveway while running inside to grab the phone. Within 15 minutes, a violation notice was taped to our door, complete with time-stamped photos. Someone had clearly been watching, waiting for the smallest slip to weaponize against us. The harassment was far too systematic to be coincidence. And it wasn't just me. Anyone even loosely tied to our group started facing the same kind of attacks. Maria Gonzalez got a citation for grass allegedly 4 inches too high, personally measured by Karen herself. James Morris was fined for the bird feeder he'd had for over a decade, suddenly declared to break an obscure design code. Diana Winters received a warning over improper trash handling because her recycling bin sat 6 inches too close to her garage. It was clearly an intimidation campaign, but it backfired. Instead of scattering us, Karen's heavy hand drove more neighbors into our corner. With every absurd violation, another household quietly joined our messaging group. By the 3rd week, nearly 30 homes, over a quarter of the community, were represented in our meetings. The breaking point came when my daughter returned from school crying. "The kids say we're troublemakers," she sobbed. Brianna told her that her mom said we were ruining property values and didn't belong here. I later learned Brianna's mother was one of Karen's closest allies on the HOA board. Karen wasn't just targeting me anymore. She dragged my child into her war. That night, once son was asleep, I called Merrick. "I'm thinking about selling," I confessed. "This is hurting son too much." Merrick didn't hesitate. That's exactly her playbook. Karen's forced at least 6 families out this way. She drowns them in violations until they sell cheap. Then her real estate buddies swoop in. Don't let her win. He was right. Walking away would hand Karen the victory, and worse, teach my daughter the wrong lesson about standing up to bullies. That same evening, the environmental review on the lake came back clear, and Meridian's board formally accepted my offer. The paperwork was ready. Later, while rereading the HOA bylaws, I noticed something Karen had been trying to slip past everyone. Her so-called special assessment for lake improvements actually required 75% homeowner approval, not just a simple majority as she'd claimed. She was knowingly breaking the HOA's own rules, betting no one would call her out. Everything crystallized in that moment. They had dragged my child into this fight. Time to remind them what happens when you provoke someone who's built a career dismantling and rebuilding entire systems, I muttered, closing my laptop. The very next morning, I liquidated $350,000 from my investment accounts, about 15% more than Karen's offer. Samuel Washington, ever loyal, even pledged another $50,000 if needed to strengthen my position. Within 48 hours, I'd signed the paperwork with Meridian Development. The lake, all 6 acres of it, including the 10-foot perimeter of shoreline, was now mine. Not the HOA's, and certainly not Karen Wellington's. What made the deal even sweeter was the timing. The very next day, Karen held a special HOA meeting to unveil her grand vision for the lake. She'd hired architects to create glossy renderings, which I'd already seen previewed on the community board. Her plan? Reduce the actual lake size by nearly 20% to make room for a members-only lounge, one that would conveniently wipe out the main fishing areas. I kept my ownership strictly under wraps, sharing the news only with Merrick and Samuel. Meanwhile, Karen went into overdrive. She convened an emergency HOA meeting, pitching an additional $50 monthly maintenance fee from each household. In truth, it was just a slush fund for her lake bid. At that meeting, she strutted to the podium with a presentation titled Elevating Lakeside Estates, a premier vision. For 20 minutes, she spoke about reimagining, the lake to boost property values and prestige. What she didn't mention, of course, was that her company would personally handle the sales of the new luxury lots she wanted to carve from community land. Karen also took the opportunity to smear me, without naming names. She alluded to outsiders who don't share our values and hinted at financially unstable individuals dragging down property worth. Samuel bravely rose to defend me, but Karen humiliated him by dragging up an old IRS audit he'd resolved years ago. With mock sweetness, she said, "Perhaps Mr. Washington isn't in the best position to lecture us on financial responsibility." The way she twisted it made him look like a cheat. The meeting sank further when Safra Duskland cautiously suggested that maybe a vote should be held before altering lake rules so drastically. Karen's eyes turned icy. "Safra, I believe your flower shop lease renewal is coming up soon, isn't it? It would be such a shame if there were complications." The threat was thinly veiled, and Safra instantly backed down. Watching Karen wield intimidation in public only made me calmer. She had no idea the crown jewel she was flaunting wasn't hers to sell anymore. The lake she was promising to reimagine already belonged to me. The centerpiece of Karen's grand vision no longer belonged to Meridian, and it would never belong to her. The satisfaction of knowing what was coming almost balanced out the months of harassment. Still, she wasn't done. Using her ties to Mayor James Wilson, Karen started piling on outside pressure. Suddenly, inspectors were knocking on my door for random safety checks. Old renovations from the previous owner were questioned, and the mayor's building inspector, Karen's cousin by marriage, suddenly seemed very concerned about the stability of my deck. The campaign was effective. Son came home crying for the third time in 2 weeks, isolated at school by classmates parroting rumors about her family. I almost gave in, but then the call I'd been waiting for finally came. Meridian's attorney confirmed that Karen had just been informed the lake was sold to an anonymous third-party investor. Her deal was dead. Hours later, Karen appeared on my doorstep, her polished mask slipping. "What did you do?" she demanded, skipping all pretense. "I know you've been talking to Meridian. Did you sabotage my deal?" I smiled, pleasant as ever. "I'm not sure what you mean, Karen. I did hear the property sold, though. Hopefully the HOA can build a good relationship with the new owner." Her eyes narrowed. "This isn't over. The HOA has a binding recreational use agreement. Whoever bought that lake can't touch access without our approval." "Maybe you should double-check the language," I said evenly. "From what I've seen, that agreement expires in less than 30 days, and renewal is up to the property owner alone." Her face drained, then hardened. "The community won't allow this. We'll sue." "Best of luck," I replied, closing the door in her face. The next 24 hours were fascinating. Karen called a closed-door board meeting, frantically trying to discover the buyer's identity and plotting ways to keep hold of the lake. She even leaned on Mayor Wilson to explore zoning restrictions or eminent domain. Merrick reassured me every angle she attempted was legally baseless. Her desperation grew with each passing day. She convened a so-called legal defense committee, insisting the HOA would fight to protect its rights. The mayor made public noise about access and zoning, but Maya confirmed there was no legal ground. Meanwhile, I was moving forward quietly, consulting a water quality specialist and partnering with a conservation nonprofit. The findings were damning. Fertilizer and landscaping runoff had fueled algae blooms, and fish stocks were declining. The HOA had never addressed the lake's real environmental health, using ecology only as a smokescreen to block fishing. I also brought in a security consultant to draft a plan for cameras and property management. Everything was being staged for the moment I revealed myself. Karen's bold move was what sealed it. She announced a grand lakeside party for all long-term residents, pointedly excluding newer families. Caterers, music, and wine stations were booked. Her intent was clear, a public show of dominance, reclaiming our lake. What she didn't know was that I'd already filed to terminate the recreational agreement early. The HOA's failure to uphold maintenance requirements gave me solid legal grounds, though it would have expired in a month anyway. I decided her party would be the perfect stage for the reveal. That Saturday, with nearly 60 neighbors gathered by the water, drinks in hand, I arrived with Merrick, Samuel, my real estate attorney, and a uniformed police officer. I calmly took the microphone Karen had been using. "Good afternoon, everyone. Beautiful day for the lake, isn't it?" Karen rushed forward, furious. "This is a private event. You weren't invited." I held my ground, voice steady. "Actually, Karen, I think there's been some confusion about who has the right to host here." I gestured to my attorney, who handed me a document. "As the legal owner of this lake and the 10-foot shoreline surrounding it, I need to inform you all, you're currently trespassing." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen's face flushed crimson. "You're lying. This is HOA property." "No, Karen," I said evenly. "It was Meridian's until 3 days ago when I purchased it outright. I raised the deed for all to see, and effective immediately, the recreational agreement is terminated. Officer Reynolds here will ensure an orderly exit. You have 15 minutes to gather your things." "You can't do this," she shouted, panicked. "The community has rights." "I can, and I have," I replied. "Officer Reynolds has a trespassing complaint ready, but I trust we won't need it. After all, Karen, you've always insisted on following the rules." The crowd buzzed with confusion and disbelief. I added, "Let this be a lesson in consequences. When power goes unchecked, this is where it leads." One by one, people left, many shooting daggers at Karen. In the aftermath, several neighbors quietly approached me. About time someone stood up to her, one whispered, "This should have happened years ago." Within a week, no trespassing signs circled the lake, and private security began regular patrols. I held a press conference with the local paper, announcing plans to turn the lake into a conservation and education site for kids. "This water has been ignored for years," I told reporters. "That ends now." Our water quality analysis revealed troubling amounts of phosphates and nitrates, most of it traced back to chemical fertilizers from lawns. My environmental team put together a restoration project aimed at bringing the lake back to its natural health. At first, the neighborhood's reaction was divided, but the mood shifted once details leaked about Karen's private development plans. Many residents who were originally upset about losing unfettered access to the lake started to rethink things after hearing she wanted to line part of the shoreline with private homes. The idea that she had been plotting to personally cash in on shared land completely changed public sentiment. Furious, Karen tried suing me for damaging community value, but the case collapsed almost instantly when my lawyer presented the property deed and the long-expired lake access agreement. Next, she tried rallying the HOA to punish me with fresh fines, new restrictions, and even threatened to slap a lien on my house. But by then, more and more neighbors were starting to question who she was really working for. The breaking point came when Safra Duskund, who had stayed silent for years, finally spoke up at an HOA meeting. "I've been on this board for 3 years," she said, her voice unsteady at first but soon firm. "I've watched Karen twist rules, single out homeowners she didn't like, and funnel HOA money into projects that just happened to increase the value of her friends' houses. Last year we blew $80,000 on upgrades to the North Park, which only serves 10 homes, every one of them owned by Karen's friends, while turning down a request for a simple playground upgrade at the main park dozens of families use." Safra's courage lit a spark. At the next meeting, other residents began sharing stories of their own, abuses they had witnessed but never dared to mention. It was like a dam breaking, years of bottled-up anger spilling out at once. Someone made a motion to audit the HOA's last 5 years of financial records, and as board members dug in, irregularities began to surface. The community wasn't splitting along the lines Karen expected. Instead of siding against me, people started realizing the real problem was the HOA's leadership itself. Sensing the shift, I rolled out a program of my own. Free fishing passes for every child in the community. There was only one condition. Kids of the current HOA board weren't eligible until their parents resigned. Petty? Maybe. But it worked. Soon, neighbors who once sneered at me while standing shoulder to shoulder with Karen were showing up on my doorstep, asking if there was any way their kids could still join. Some of them even began openly criticizing Karen, the same people who defended her just weeks earlier. The most satisfying case was Veronica Palmer. She had been one of Karen's loudest supporters, yet here she was on my porch, uneasy and hesitant. "My son really wants to learn to fish," she admitted. "Your daughter mentioned a youth conservation program." I confirmed it. "Yes, we're starting an ecology and conservation workshop for kids. Lynn's helping with it. But of course, only families not currently represented on the HOA board can participate." Veronica's face was a cocktail of frustration and calculation. "I've been rethinking my position on the board. Some recent decisions, they're troubling." "How interesting," I replied with deliberate neutrality. "Well, if things change, let me know." The program starts Saturday. Within 3 days, Veronica publicly resigned from the HOA board, citing personal reasons. 2 more members followed her lead by the end of the week. Karen, growing desperate, tried a smear campaign, claiming the lake was polluted and dangerous. I shot that down immediately by publishing official water tests showing the lake was actually cleaner than under HOA oversight. Her next move was even more reckless. She tried bribing Merrick Henderson, promised to wipe his old HOA violations clean, even offered him a stipend back seat on a new board if he helped pressure me into selling the lake back. What she didn't realize was Merrick recorded every word. On tape, Karen's voice was crystal clear. "Merrick, I can make all those violations disappear. There'll be a seat for you on the new board, paid, of course. All you have to do is convince Thorncroft the lake is a liability. Tell him about the insurance costs, the environmental risks. Spook him into letting it go." Merrick handed me the recording with a grin. Seems Karen forgot the first rule of being a villain. Don't try bribing a retired ethics attorney. Her downfall came not long after. My cameras caught her one night trespassing with 2 other board members, suspiciously close to the waterline. The footage showed her uncapping a small bottle and pouring something into the lake, right where children usually fished. I immediately turned the evidence over to police. Karen was arrested for trespassing and attempted environmental contamination. Once investigators started digging, things only got worse for her. They uncovered questionable spending, selective enforcement of rules, and a pattern of her using her role to depress certain property values before her real estate partners swooped in to buy them. 2 weeks later, I invited the entire community, except the sitting HOA leadership, to my house to discuss the lake's future. The turnout was incredible. Nearly every household showed up. I unveiled my plan. The lake would be transferred into a new community trust under 3 conditions. First, the HOA had to be completely restructured with fair elections and term limits. Second, all HOA rules would be reviewed and rewritten for equal enforcement. Third, an independent ethics committee rotating among community members would oversee every decision. Then I revealed the twist nobody had seen coming. Not even Merrick or Samuel. "Some of you may not know this," I explained, letting the silence stretch. "But for the past month, I've also been quietly buying up mortgage notes in this community from Lakeside National Bank." I paused, watching faces pale. That includes Karen Wellington's house. The room erupted in shocked whispers. Through my financial network and Samuel's banking ties, I had managed to acquire the mortgage notes on nearly 20% of the homes in our neighborhood, targeting properties owned by Karen and her inner circle. It was entirely lawful, though admittedly unusual, and it gave me considerable influence. I don't plan on foreclosing or forcing anyone out. I reassure the uneasy faces around me. In fact, I'm prepared to refinance every loan at rates lower than the market average. But before that, we need to repair the broken system that's been tearing this community apart. When the vote came to overhaul the HOA leadership, it was almost unanimous. Karen Wellington was ousted in disgrace, facing not just criminal charges for trespassing and attempted contamination, but also a wave of civil lawsuit from homeowners she had unfairly targeted. Her real estate firm was placed under investigation for shady dealings, and within months, her home sat unsold on the market, poisoned by her ruined reputation. In her place, Safford Duskin was elected president, pledging reforms and full transparency. The lake was officially renamed Rachel's Lake in memory of my late wife, and I legally transferred ownership to the newly formed community trust, guaranteeing permanent access for all residents. 3 months later, Celine and I hosted a community fishing day at Rachel's Lake. Nearly every family showed up. Kids learned to cast lines. Parents mingled across social circles that Karen had once kept divided. That evening, after everyone left, Celine and I sat quietly on the dock, watching the sunset shimmer across the water. She leaned against my shoulder, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in so long. "Mom would be proud of you, Dad," she whispered, looking over the lake. Now a place of peace rather than conflict. I realized she was right. "I think she'd be proud of both of us," I said softly. A year later, our neighborhood had become a model for HOA reform. Communities nearby even adopted our bylaws and ethics committee system. Karen, stripped of most of her wealth by lawsuits, had moved away. Around that time, I was asked to run for mayor after James Wilson bowed out of re-election following his exposed ties to Karen. I declined. Instead, I created a scholarship fund in Rachel's name dedicated to children who had lost a parent to cancer. Because sometimes defeating a bully isn't about becoming one yourself. It's about rewriting the rules so they can never do the same harm again. And if you're watching this video while fighting your own HOA nightmare, remember this. Never underestimate someone who knows the system and has the patience to strike when the time is right.